Equitable Education, all for education. And today, this special session is titled School Leadership and Management. And with this session, we have three distinguished speakers who will come and share with us their view of leadership. The first speaker is Mrs. Chua Yen-ching, and she's the Executive Director of the Academy of Singapore Teacher, and she is also the Deputy Director General for Professional Development at the Ministry of Education in Singapore. The second speaker is all the way from the US, Mr. Kwesi Rollins. And Mr. Rollins is the Vice President on Leadership and Engagement from the Institutional for Educational Leadership in the Washington, D.C. in the US. And our third speaker is from Thailand, is Dr. Wararak Kongdenfa from the Resuan Universities. So I would like to first start with Mrs. Chua. I'm aware that you have been the founding principal of a very unique school which enhanced students in terms of giving them opportunity to learn, to have education, to have access. And that school is called Northlight in Singapore. Could you please tell us more about Northlight School in Singapore and why is it so unique? Yes.
All right, just to share that maybe just a liner or so to explain some of our education system. So in Singapore, we have 6 years of primary school education, and after which they will sit for a primary school leaving exams. And those who are able to clear the primary school leaving exams, they will move on to a secondary school education. But if they are not able to clear the primary school leaving exam, they can actually repeat 1 year to actually build that foundation. So way back in 2006, when we conceptualized the school, we then start to take on the first batch of students in 2007. So the students have a choice. So instead of repeating the primary 6, they can have a choice to go to Northlight, the Northlight School. So it is fully funded by the government. And what's important is that we need to have a very compelling vision and a mission for the school. So when we first started the school, we know that some of the children may come from very difficult background. They may have experience. They may not have experienced successes in life, so we need to do a little bit more. So what we have done was we just to activate my first slide, and that is the school logo. All right, let me just share with you the school logo. The school logo has corporate colors of purple and white. So you will see the star emerging from the school. That's white and purple, right? So you find, so for us, purple is the color of the sky where it's the darkest, and white is the color of the stars. So we encourage our teachers and our students to always remember that the darker it gets, the brighter you shine. And these corporate colors, they are very important. So you find that when you enter the school, you will see everything is purple and white, right? The school colors are there, and it's a very motivating factor for the students. The other thing that we have done, all right, is that for us, the teacher factor is very important, right? So the thing is that, in fact, the teachers is actually the core theory of success. So when we first conceptualized the school, we actually told the Ministry of Education that we do not want teachers to be posted to the school. We want teachers to apply to join the school. So I know you'll be wondering whether, this group of students may be a bit more challenging to teach. Will there be teachers who would like to apply to the school? But we believe that it's important for our teachers to be passionate and competent. So just to show you this slide, we started off in identifying the competent and passionate teachers And I would like to say that way back in 2006, when we recruited the first batch of teachers, when we actually bring across the mission, we have 150 of them turn up when we only needed 20 in 2007 for our first batch of students. So once we have identified the right group of people, that's the first principle of getting the right people up the bus, all right, and slowly then we put them in the right seat. So once we have the teachers, we actually believe in collective relationship. Some people may be very competent, very passionate, but they cannot work in a group. Then we cannot have this person in the community, because collective relationship is something that the school believed in. And once we have that ingredients, we found that slowly the students begin to respond. They enjoy coming to school, they enjoy learning, and not just the people within the school, even people outside the school find that it's a great place to learn and work. And later on, even I have left the school 8 years, and the school has 2 new principals. And now when we look back, we find that they are able to bring the school to the next S-curve. All right. In fact, I just want to share with you a very touching story that happens just last December. We have a company who has been a very good partner, but with the school. But recently, because of all the changes, they have to re-strategize their business plan. And towards the end of December, they need to have a very big clearance sale to reduce the cost or to cut down the cost. But they only left with about 14 staff, and they couldn't manage the clearance sale. And the boss took a picture and sent to me, and that picture showed that the alumni of the schools were trained by the company, all right, when they were in school. Now they are working. They actually went back. They took leave. They went back to the company and rendered their support. And that is really very encouraging to know that they are responding to this after they've left school about 6 years ago. So that is paying forward. So I've written a note to the principal to say that is very good. While all our technologies strive to build first-class robots, we as educators must strive to build first-class humans. And the students truly displayed the spirit of empathy, all right, and gratitude. So when we look back, it's very gratifying, although it was challenging at times.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very touching story and a very good example of how a school and a community can help encourage the student. And I love the logo of Northlight, a very touching phrase which say, the darker it gets, the brighter it shines. So I will remember that and use it to inspire myself as well. So before I ask you more, Mrs. Shaw, about the character of the leadership, because it needs a good leadership to be able to do that, let me ask Mr. Kwesi, can you share with us the context of the school in the US, particularly in the DC, because I know you've been working with community a lot, and within the community of the socially challenging area. Can you share with us the context of that, please?
And so good morning, this is Kwesi Rollins. I'm the Vice President for Leadership and Engagement at the Institute for Educational Leadership in Washington, DC, and I'm really happy to join you to talk a little bit about equitable education and in particular the role of school leaders. It's important to cover a couple of things in order to get to the heart of the issue. And one is part of the context for schooling in the United States. We've got over 50 million students in public schools. We've got a lot of districts with a lot of autonomy. There are over 16,000 school districts, over 100,000 schools, and more than half of our students in public schools are kids of color, and also more than half of the students in public schools are in poverty. So that's an important kind of fact that's part of the context. Child poverty was already, notable in the United States. Is even more notable now in the age of the pandemic. Over 25 million American children live in poverty. We know that directly as a result of COVID-19, 40 plus million people lost jobs, and we're not out of the woods yet. We also know that over 50 million people are facing food insecurity. So all of those things become part of the context for equitable education in the United States. I think it's also useful to understand what we think of as school leadership and what principals should know and be able to do in order to be successful. Most of the research shows that school leaders have a direct impact on student achievement in 3 ways. And so if you look at the arrow, we're looking at school leadership and what leads to improved achievement. And it's basically that they have 3 roles: setting direction, developing people, and redesigning the organization. And so some of these things are pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. Obviously, setting direction is setting goals. They're the holder of the vision. It's their job to make sure that all of the staff, and in particular teachers, are clear about the vision of the school and are ready to kind of create the kind of environment that will lead to high levels of performance. Developing people is a critical role. Obviously, the bulk of staff in schools are teachers. So selecting good teachers, developing teachers, creating the right kind of climate to facilitate their ongoing improvement in instruction is a huge expectation on principals to be instructional leaders, to improve the quality of teaching and learning is a major expectation. And then part of that, of course, is just creating the kind of healthy environment that teachers can thrive in. And so part of that is redesigning the organization. It's really understanding organizational culture, understanding how to create the right kind of culture in which everyone can thrive, not just students, but teachers as well. And that sometimes means modifying structures to the extent that principals have more autonomy over their budget. That includes making different kinds of decisions around funding. That includes controlling their professional development calendars. All of those things become factors. And so we look at those 2 things, and then you try to imagine, so how does equity fit into that construct? On the one hand, you've got this major context around poverty, kids of color. You've got the majority of the education workforce. Over 80% of teachers in America are white women. Almost 80% of school principals are white men, and yet over 50% of students are kids of color. So that's a major kind of challenge going in. And so as we look at these questions, and I'll just have a couple more slides and then stop, and then we'll hear from another speaker. But so those are major kind of entry points in terms of examining the challenges. Some of the main challenges, and I couldn't leave it at 3 because there are a lot of challenges to promoting equity. Lack of emphasis in pre-service training is clearly a barrier. For educators in the United States, states control what is required to get a license for teaching and get a license for being a school principal. We've got 50 states plus the District of Columbia plus Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and all these other so-called territories. So you can imagine there's 50 plus different sets of rules around how to get a license to be a teacher. Many states share reciprocity, so they have similar requirements. But then universities gear their training toward kind of the bare minimum so that their students can pass the test and get a teaching or a license to be a principal. So that means that some of the issues attendant to equity, inclusion, some of these other kinds of issues are not necessarily top priority in terms of getting your license. So you have a lack of pre-service training, you have inadequate capacity building and professional development after the fact, because we know that once you get licensed to become a teacher or once you get licensed to become a principal, that's not the end of the journey, that's the beginning of the journey. You're not automatically ready to do all of the things that you need to do your learning journey has to continue, and then there's some complexity there. We've got a lot of districts, particularly larger districts, that have elaborate structures around providing coaching for principals, but we find that a lot of the coaching models have not been up to snuff. Very often you'll find large districts that have way too many principals being coached by one individual, and then that's not a good model. In some of our work with school districts and with principals in particular, we find that a ratio of 6 or 7 principals to 1 coach is a manageable kind of ratio, whereas many other districts, for example, we work very closely with Philadelphia Public Schools, not to put them on the spot, but they've got 215 public schools, so that's at least 215 principals, and they've got 15 assistant principals who are playing a coaching role. So assistant superintendents, excuse me. So you can see that that's a ratio that's not terribly manageable in terms of actually moving the needle on school leaders' ability to kind of do all of these complex things. And I use that district as an example because it's a district that is 100% free and reduced lunch, which means that 100% of their students are in poverty. So poverty, kids of color, all of those things become major challenges. It doesn't mean that it's insurmountable, but those things become major challenges. Lack of culturally relevant pedagogy, deficit mindsets, exclusionary practices. These are some of the things that are kind of obvious barriers. And then just one more minute on exclusionary practices. So you find that particularly in neighborhoods that are predominantly of color and are predominantly economically challenged, you've got some of the most exclusionary practices. So in and out of school suspensions, in-school detention, zero tolerance policies, the presence of law enforcement that is not there to keep kids safe, but is basically there to provide discipline, which has emerged as an issue in the wake of all of the protests in the United States. Part of the call for many protesters across the entire country now is not just to defund the police, but to get police out of schools and to replace those police officers with social workers, with school nurses, and other kinds of roles that could be much more useful and helpful. So those are the kind of exclusionary practices we talk about. There's the direct ones, and then there's indirect practices. Many of these are pretty obvious: bias and assumptions, hostile treatment, low expectations. All of these things are among the challenges. So I'm going to stop there so that you can go to the next speaker, and then I'll pick this back up when we start talking about inclusive practices.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kwesi. That's a very interesting perspective in the context of the school in the U.S. Okay, Mrs. Chua, so back to the point of the key characteristic or issue of leadership. Based on your experience, running a school for disadvantaged children, and also you're in a position at the Ministry of Education, which provide the system to help the school leaders to address the equity. What do you think are the key characteristics of school leaders in your view?
Okay, I would like to thank Kwesi for sharing, and I think that even though he's in the States and we are in Singapore and we are in Thailand, I think the basic principle remains. So let me touch on his first principle of mission and vision. Now that is very important. The mission and vision is not just what is on the wall, or we ask our teachers, do you understand what's the mission? Do you know what's the mission? But do you believe in it? So when we help this group of children, I think the very important part is that we all must believe that if we run an organization, we run a school to help this group of children, we need to give them hope. All right, so this is hope. All right, hope is a very powerful word for young people. And hope is not about wishful thinking. Hope is about confident expectation. Right, so we must believe in it. The students must believe in it. They have to work at it. And when we work together, we'll be able to see. Now, many of our children, because they have been experiencing repeated failures, or they have not experienced successes, or their home environment has been very challenging, and as a result of that, very often they lose hope. So this, they don't have hope, right? So it is important that at the end of the day, if we come into contact with them, we have the opportunity to work with them. It's very important for both the school leaders as well as the teachers to give them back this hope, which is actually our mission, because it's always, look, and in fact, this hope is even bigger than the first hope that we saw, right? So this is very important. Now, working with such kids, is very challenging at times, and that's the reason why that in the process of fulfilling the mission, we have to change a bit of our mental models. Sometimes our mental models limit us. For example, if I will ask you, can you give me an adjective of a ruler, a measurement, that used for measurement, ruler? Give me one adjective. And I'm very sure that almost 90% of you to say that the ruler need to be straight because you need to measure something. But you look at this ruler is not straight, all right? But it's just as accurate. So sometimes our mental model limits us. When we see this group of children, we find that, this how much you can achieve. I think this how much. So it sort of limits us. Or this one is too challenging. It'd be very difficult to help them. Or the families are just too tough, for example. So very often, for us, we are very overwhelmed at times. So if let's say all of us, when we want to help this group of children, we all must have a desired future, right? So the desired future is always right at the top. This is the desired future. But we are very overwhelmed with all our current realities at the bottom. So if we are the rubber band, all right, and we are being stretched, it's a very painful feeling because it's very tense. So one way of releasing the tension is to either move this down or to move this up. So, for example, very often we tend to move this down. We feel better because the tension is being released, but we are lowering our standards. When we lower our standards, you know what's the price we have to pay? We abandon our aspiration, vision, mission, and dreams. So what we need to do as school leaders and to encourage our teachers is hold on to our desired future and bring our current realities up. So I give you an example. You asked about Northlight. The first site of the school is at the east of Singapore. Then when the students sort of registered, the teachers realized that many of them stay in the north. And they were wondering that, wow, the school is just so far away from their home, would they come to school, right? So when we all work together on the first day, the teachers say that we want at least 85% of them to come to school every day. We only can tolerate about 15% absenteeism. But when they realize that so many of them are staying so far from the school, they say that, if we have 65%, we should be very happy. And as a school leader, we say, hey, I thought we say it's 85%, why do we lower down to 65%? This is what we mean, all right? We say we should keep at 85% because that's our aspiration and goal. And they say, but it's very tough. So what happened was, the school actually catered for 3 buses to bring them from a train station to school every morning. Look, then you overcome your current realities to bring it up, and we still achieve the 85% attendance, at least 85%. Because if the students are not coming to school, even you have the best program, you cannot execute, right? You need to execute. So the vision and the mission part of what Crazy mentioned, I think is very important. Number 2, developing people, the teachers, that is key, all right? Because teachers, they are the ones who will make or break our system. They must believe in what they do, although it's very challenging. So for example, for me in the academy, when I visit school, the students will ask me, Mrs. Chua, what do you do in MOE? What is your job? So I always, no point telling them my destination, it's just meaningless to them. So I share with them that, I'm like your principal. I look after a very big school, you know. All right, but when we walk along the corridor and we look into the classroom, they are all your teachers. So they were like very surprised and says, you mean our teachers also go to school? And I says, yes, they go to school. So you look at them, they are so refreshing every day. When it comes to learning, we can never say that we have arrived, right? Because it's always a journey, and we are keep learning all the time. So for example, just give a very good example, during this COVID-19 period, the pandemic, we had 1 month of circuit breaker, and our teachers need to go into home-based learning. A very skillful teacher in the classroom and a teacher to actually develop lessons to teach online is a different skill set, right? But I would like to say that it's because of the profession development that we have been providing to the teachers. Although they're in a very steep learning curve, they work very hard and they learn very fast, and they're able to come up with effective lessons, even engaging the lessons of the students online. So in the past, a lot of things they find it very difficult. It's almost impossible, but now you find that they're able to do it. The other thing, the third point that Crazy mentioned is the culture. That is very important. It's not just a one-person thing, it has to be collective. If let's say the teachers do not work as a group, it'll be very tough. All right, we must say that whatever I do will affect you, whatever you do will affect me, we all must work together as an organization. So here you can see, okay, there's three colors road. If I were to just join the yellow with yellow, I tie this up, okay. We have the red with red here. All right, then we have the third row, and that is the green with green. Now what happened is this, if all of us say that this is only my area, I only look after this area. This is only my class, I only look after this class. But as far as the students are concerned, we are together. And this is just my job. We can't do that, because at the end of the day, it has to be a living and learning community. So like this, right? We exist as one. We cannot just say, and that becomes a culture. So this is something that not only do you know, do you understand, but you believe. So in Singapore, for our teachers, we have this thing called teacher ownership and teacher leadership. We own our own learning, we own our own professional development. Nobody owns our professional development, and it's always teacher-led. For example, who teach the doctors? Doctors, right? Who teach the lawyers? Lawyers. So who teach the teachers? Teachers. So for us, we have a career pathway for teachers, and teachers can move on from a senior teachers to a lead teacher to a master teachers. So the master teachers are the ones who will put the lead teachers very close in their radar. The lead teachers help in the cluster of teachers. The lead teachers help the senior teachers, and the senior teachers' main focus is in the school. So at the end of the day, we try to level everything up. It's very fortunate in our country because all our teachers are trained. They need to go for at least 16 months to 2 years of pre-service, depending on or 4 years of pre-service, depending on what kind of program they are in. And okay, every school has a very adequate and strong budget for us to run, all right, and we have the autonomy to run, so we don't need to worry too much about money, so that we can just focus on the professional aspect. And for the later I will show you a slide to show that for us, if you are a high needs school, we give you more resources. Great. So it's called a needs-based resourcing. So I would just write on the 3 points that Crazy mentioned, because it's exactly the 3 points, the 3 key points that school leaderships need to look into when they manage the school. So it's not about the principal herself or himself, it's about the whole community.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrs. Chua. I really love your tricks. Very inspiring. The trick is always inspiring and very useful, thought-provoking. Now, I'd like to see what Kwesi have as a trick. So
yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that kind of skill set. Most of my skill is in talking a lot.
but perhaps, yeah, but perhaps if you beside the tricks, both of us can learn more. I'm not good at that too, but can you share with us, because you're working in a different context, you're working with the area of the community, of the socially this challenge. And you also run Institute for Leadership. What do you think as the characteristic of leadership so that they will enhance equity in education in your context?
Well, and thanks again, and thanks so much for those examples, Mrs. Chua. That was really, really wonderful. And, you know, good school leadership is good school leadership all over the world. And the difference is that some governments, some places have made the kind of investments and have the kind of systems and structures that ensure higher quality. And that's one of the things I'm often jealous of when I look at some of these other examples internationally, because when you have 50 plus different state systems, then it's no wonder that things are kind of all over the place. But I do think this issue of mental models is very important. Our organization is what you would call an NGO. So we're a nonprofit organization. We work nationally. We work closely with community groups all over the country. Just this week, in fact, tomorrow is our last day, we're wrapping up a virtual conference that has been going on for what will have been 4 weeks, 4 events a day, over 4 weeks to replace what was going to be a face-to-face conference in Los Angeles. And that conference is focused on community schools and family and community engagement. And that we find is an entry point because when you think about the context that I laid out earlier, what it also means is that when you have that kind of poverty and you have all of those other kinds of issues, schools end up having to deal with a lot of issues other than teaching and learning. And you can't really get to the teaching and learning enterprise until some of those other challenges are fully addressed. And so that is part of what the community schools movement is really all about. When we talk about exclusionary practices, one of the greatest ones is low expectations. So Mrs. Chua used the term mental models. You know, we think of that as deficit thinking as a mental model. This idea that is quite prevalent in this country due to racism and due to the history of racism in this country, which is on full display in this moment. But we know that there's lower expectations of poor children, and that's a mental model. So Mrs. Chua talked about hope, and we want hope to grow. But it's hard for hope to grow if you have low expectations. And if you believe that their parents don't have anything to offer. So parents in poverty sometimes have to work many, many jobs just to make ends meet, to keep their family fed and safe. It doesn't mean that they don't love their children. It doesn't mean that they can't help with their education. It doesn't mean that they can't be partners, but it does take a different kind of effort to make that happen. And so exclusionary practices flow from that kind of thinking, those mental models that only see deficits and don't see assets. Right. And there are many, many assets in poor communities. There are many, many assets in communities of color. And the other thing that's interesting, and that goes to systems and structures. So what you laid out in terms of the process for becoming a teacher in Singapore, there's much more investment on the front end on good training of teachers. And so what you find in the United States is that in the most challenging environments where you have high poverty and you have all these other issues going on, we have what we would call the least highly qualified teachers. So you have teachers who are not certified in their subject area, teachers who are on provisional licenses because they didn't pass the first time, but they have been given some time to make up for it. You've got essentially your least qualified people working in the most challenging environments. So that's a disconnect. And the same is true at the level of school leadership. So that's not an insurmountable issue, but it adds to the challenge. So when you have challenges compounding challenges, it's no wonder that you have a hard time offering the kind of equity that we all believe is so important. And so I want to talk a little bit about inclusionary practices. We talked about exclusionary practices, and we know that school leaders who foster and promote culturally relevant curriculum practices, who value engaging parents and families and other caring adults, and who make that a priority, who are effective at creating partnerships and collaborating, and using the assets of the full community that they have access to. School leaders who emphasize mentoring and modeling and fostering self-advocacy, and also, frankly, school leaders who have the skill set because of their own self-awareness and their own practice of self-reflection, school leadership that's also growing in this area. You know, we all as adults have our own biases and assumptions, but we also have the capability through self-reflection and continuing to learn to overcome those things and to not let those negative mental models of deficit thinking rule the day. And so we have found, for example, in the era of COVID, in the pandemic, where literally everything just kind of shut down overnight, and we had to go to distance and remote learning overnight, completely unprepared for that, all over the world. So we're not unique in that. Folks were unprepared. But what we discovered in crisis mode is that schools that had good relationships with their families, that had engaged their families, and districts and communities that already were working together and collaborating on a lot of these challenges were in a better position to respond to the crisis. They were in a better position to innovate. They were in a better position. They didn't lose schools and districts that didn't have good relationships with families, couldn't find kids to get them equipment, couldn't find kids to get them lessons, couldn't reach them at home. It's ridiculous when you hear, and we knew this because we convened people every week. We heard from hundreds of communities every week, beginning in the middle of March. And so we knew that in some places they were able to find kids and do some great innovative things. In other places, 1,500 kids, 1,000 kids, 5,000 kids missing, can't find them because there's no relationship, no contact. So we know that there's a huge difference. And then this last slide really goes to the ultimate challenge for us as a system. And I think in some respects, places like Singapore have an edge there, is you've got to have a system. You've got to have a system for preparing educators. You've got to have a system for professionally developing and continuing to build the capacity of educators. There's got to be some consistency there. There's no way you can actually integrate all of these issues around tackling the challenges of equity without good systems, without integration, and without alignment. And so I think that is for us, those are the kind of goals that we want. We think that those are part of the essential conditions for achieving this goal. We know that engaging families is a big part of that. And in fact, the studies show that in places where there's good family engagement and good relationships, you have a higher ability to really address a lot of these challenges. So I'm gonna stop the share there, but I think I've gotten the point across.
Well, thank you very much, Kwesi, for sharing with that very interesting key characteristic of leadership in the context that is very challenging. And at the same time, you provide us what is important for the system to support all those teachers and the leaders in those schools. Okay, so now let's move back to Singapore in Asia part. In Singapore, in your context, Mrs. Shore, you used to run a big school, Northlight, and also now in a system at the Ministry of Education. What do you think would be the support to all these school principals for them to be able to bring about or promote equity for the students, these disadvantaged students?
Okay, thanks, Tinsri. So besides the teachers, having a very comprehensive professional development roadmap to transit from pre-service to in-service, all our school principals are also trained in a formal manner, right? And even after that, they will still go for in-service training. So they will all undergo training before they become school leaders. So just to write on Crazy's 4 C's, I just want to summarize what we have discussed for the 4 C's for school principals for the sake of those who are listening in. First, as principal, we need to have a compelling vision and vision. We mentioned that. Number 2, we need to change our own mental models before we can change the mental models of our teachers and our parents. We need to redefine success. I give you one example of a mental model. If you will go to Northlight, you will see posters on the wall. All right, the school has its fair share of CCTV, the closed circuit TV. All right, every school has closed circuit TV. The school also has that, but the teachers were very creative and innovative. They put on the wall, it says that our CCTV records honesty 24 hours daily. Our CCTV records good manners 24 hours daily. Because CCTV is to catch people doing wrong things, right? But the teachers want to catch them doing the right things and recognize it so they become part of them. And that is a change in mental models. Another poster that you see, they have all the Karen boards, Karen seats. They have also computers for the children to play, and they put there, all these things are for you. If you vandalize them, we will be very sad from your teachers. And not if you vandalize them, you'll be punished. It's a different kind of messages, right? So first is compelling mission. Number 2, change our mental models. And number 3 is collective relationship. We can never do it all by ourselves, no matter how strong and how confident we are. We need to have a community, all right, of especially our teachers and non-teaching staff as well. And the 4th C is community partnership. There are a lot of things that we cannot do on our own, all right? We need to partner with people, and when we engage parents and ourselves, we are on the same side of the fence. We are helping the same children. We are not on a different side of the fence. We are on the same side of the fence. And since you are asked for reference from Northlight, what the school did was they engaged partnership with the community, and it's just very encouraging. I give you just a few examples. Number 1, we have a bakery, all right, a baker and bakery, which is in central Singapore. They provide free buns for our children every morning for the first 6 years. And so that, because there are some who come to school without breakfast, all right, they give them free buns. Number 2, we have a group of cabby drivers, taxi drivers, all right, 40 of them. They said that if a child is sick, the club just need to call one of them, and then they'll just go down the list. The one nearest to the school will come and pick the kid and send them home for free. They don't have money to take taxis, and we don't want them to take public transport because they are very sick. The last one was this sponsor. He realized that the students just aspire to just eat Ben and Jerry ice cream. I can say it's just a simple dream, right? I can easily fulfill. But it's very tough for this group of kids because for them, that's a luxury, right? So they sponsored in 2007, when the school was first started, a sponsor gave every child a Ben and Jerry ice cream, a cup of Ben and Jerry ice cream. Now, what happened was, it was during recess, the Ben and Jerry van turned into the school. Everybody was just so shocked, and everybody was given a Ben and Jerry ice cream, and they were so appreciative. Now, 10 years on, this boy who benefited from this cup of Ben and Jerry ice cream, today he has a very small scuba diving school. And last year, he brought back 850 cups of Ben and Jerry ice cream. And he told the juniors, he says, look, I want you to experience what I've experienced 10 years ago. Oh. Right, so that is like paying forward. It's a very powerful lesson. You say hope, and that's indeed hope. Okay, let's discuss about what we do in Singapore at the system level. You look at this picture, right? So whenever we have something new or we want to look at resources, so we don't give, like, for example, if you need X amount of money or you need number of teachers, we don't just give the equal number of teachers for every school. So that's our first picture. That's equality. That's equity. The second one, ours is needs-based resourcing. You have high need, we give you more resources in terms of teachers, in terms of money, in terms of other support. Right? So for example, there are schools with very high need. They have 2 counselors instead of 1. They have 2 allied educators to support children with special needs instead of 1. They have student welfare officers where they knock at the doors of the children's home to encourage them to come to school. So that is needs-based resourcing for us. And the third picture, that's my favorite, you remove all barriers to learning. And what happened then is that I would like to say for us, our philosophy is we will protect the bottom, but we will not cap the top. We will let the top flourish, right? So if there's a gap, so be it, because every child must develop to its fullest potential. At the system level, we have set up this office called the Uplift Office, UPLIFT. It stands for Uplifting Pupils in Life and Inspiring Family Task Force. So this Uplift Office in MOE will work with the other ministry, like our Ministry for Social and Family Development, work with other aspects so that they can in turn help the families, help the parents to look for jobs, so that it's a coordinated effort, because a lot of things we cannot do on our own and by ourselves. And the other thing is that we have we want to be more proactive in the community support so that at the end of the day, our students will be able to benefit. Let me just end off by saying that, when children learn, our nation will prosper. So when we have difficult kids, it's like that, right? But when they come to school and they learn, they find that actually it's not that bad. At the end of the day, they will be like this. They can still flourish. All right, even though they are in a very difficult environment, they can still be like that. And that will be our greatest satisfaction, because every child can learn and can achieve. They must be given opportunities regardless of the family background and regardless of the challenges that they face at home.
Yes, thank you very much. And that's very inspiring. And also the last picture. I've seen the first 2 in many occasions, but the last one, which we bring out the barriers from system so that everyone have, all these kids can see what's available for them. I think that's another inspiring graphic to reflect equity for everyone. So thank you, Mrs. Chua. So Kwesi, your word on the system, what would you think in addition to the big picture of equity and leadership context?
This morning said something that I think is worth sharing here that sums it up, that we've got a decision to make as a nation. Will COVID-19 end up being a permanent setback for learners seeking education as a pathway out of generational poverty? And so that's the crossroads we find ourselves in. Now, having said that, I'm in the change business, and so we're in the change business. And when you're in the change business, you have to have hope. So, not a magic trick. I can't make the letters bigger like Mrs. Chua, but you have to have hope when you're in the change business. And so we hope that people will get it together. We're in an incredible teachable moment in this country around those connections. I would dare say an incredible teachable moment in various parts of the world around how all of these issues come together. And I hope that we'll rise to the occasion and do the right thing. And what part of why I hope we will, well, I'm somewhat confident that we will, is that we've got a lot of young people around the country that won't tolerate anything less. And so the envelope has been pushed, and we will see if us old folks can respond and keep up.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Wararak Kongdenfa from Naresuan Universities. She will share with us in the context of how equity can be brought in with the enhance of leadership. Yes, Dr. Wararak, yes.
Today I'm going to tell you about my experience in building information system for solving equity problems. So I will tell you a story about Phuket City that I have been working with for 6 years now. the first day that I visit the schools in Phuket City, some school principals told me that they have problem, that they know that there are some problems in their school, but they don't know what are the problems and who are the disadvantaged students in their schools, or who are the students at risk in their school. They don't have this kind of information. For example, they tell me a story about a student who are very good at sport and got scholarship to attend university. But this student has very low education performance, so he lost the opportunity to attend the university. This is kind of equity problem in Thai education as well, because if you are in big school or large school that have enough money to buy information system, right? You may know this kind of information, but for principals who are in small school or school that don't have a lot of money, they might not have money to buy information system to collect this kind of information to do the analysis and making a good decision. So we working with Phuket City and EEF to develop an information system that will help the school to know the school performance. And you will see this slides, right? You will know that in your school who are the average performance and the attendance and also the body weight of the students in the whole schools. And you can also see this is the education performance in science, art, math, and language. And you can also go to the individual student data, and you know that who are at risk in each category. For example, who are at risk in the attendance criteria, who are at risk at the education performance or health or economics criteria. So this is one kind of early warning system that will help the principal to detect who are students at risk and to prevent students from dropping out of the schools. So the governance in Phuket City have more vision than using the information inside the school. She also create a kind of education blueprint that will have the vision of the Phuket City on education and ask the school to develop education improvement plan that align to that city goals. And each year we will use this information system to monitor the school performance based on the goal that each school have set by themselves. Based on this information system, we can help schools in Phuket to improve their equity on education.
Great. Thank you very much to spend time with us and sharing the view of the leadership and management to promote equity in education. And I learned a lot from both of you. And the most important point that I get out of you two from your experience is that being a leader to promote equity in education, you can not only lead with your head, but you have to lead with your heart. You have to know the context of the community. When you lead with your heart, you bring along the community because it takes the whole village to raise a child. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we will have the Q&A session at the end. So thank you. Enjoy your day. Yes. สวัสดีค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ
Yes.